Once upon a time, there was a little girl who was dearly loved by all, most of all by her grandmother. Wherever she went, she always wore a little red cape with a hood, which her grandmother made for her. So people called her Little Red Riding Hood. One morning, her mother packed a basket and said, "Here are a piece of cake, a pat of butter, and a bottle of grape juice. Take them to your grandmother, Little Red Riding Hood. She's sick and bad, and they'll do her good. Keep right on the path. Don't play on the way. Don't talk to strangers. And when you see your grandmother, don't forget to say good day." Little Red Riding Hood promised. She took the basket, waved goodbye to her mother, and started off along the path through the wood. She had not gone far before she met a wolf. "Good morning, Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf politely. "Where are you going, and what have you in your basket?" "I'm going to see my grandmother," said Little Red Riding Hood. "I have a piece of cake, a pat of butter, and a bottle of grape juice for her." "Well," said the wolf, "and where does your grandmother live?" "On the other side of the wood," said Little Red Riding Hood, pointing with her finger. "My grandmother's sick and bad." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," said the wolf. "Why don't you pick her some flowers?" "I promised my mother I'd stay on the path," said Little Red Riding Hood. "A pretty bunch of flowers would surely make your grandmother feel better. Don't you agree, Little Red Riding Hood?" And away he went through the trees. In no time at all, Little Red Riding Hood was wandering about in the wood, picking flowers here and there. Meanwhile, the wolf ran straight to Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother's house. "Who's there?" called Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother from inside. "It's Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf in a wee little voice. "Oh, come in, my dear," called the grandmother. And the wolf went in and ate Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother up. Then he put on her nightgown and cap, climbed into bed, and pulled the covers up over his nose. Soon, Little Red Riding Hood came skipping along towards her grandmother's house. "Good day, grandmother," she called. She went in and stepped close to her grandmother's bed. "Ooh, grandmother," she cried, for her grandmother looked very strange. "What big ears you have." "The better to hear you with, my dear," said the wolf, rolling his eyes. "Ooh, grandmother, what big eyes you have," cried Little Red Riding Hood. "The better to see you with, my dear," said the wolf, snapping his jaws. "Oh, grandmother," cried Little Red Riding Hood, "what big teeth you have." "The better to eat you with," said the wolf, and he sprang from the bed and ate Little Red Riding Hood up. A passing woodsman stepped into the house to see how Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother was feeling. And when he saw the wolf, he said, "Ha ha, I've found you at last, you wicked old rascal." He lifted his axe, and with one blow killed him. Then he cut the wolf open, and out stepped Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother. They thanked the woodsman for what he'd done. Then all three sat down and ate the cakes and the butter and drank of the grape juice which Little Red Riding Hood had brought. One day, a hare made fun of a tortoise because he was so slow. The tortoise, after he'd listened for a while, couldn't stand it any longer. "I'll show you," he said. "I'll run a race with you, and I'll bet that I will win." The hare thought this was a very funny idea. In fact, he thought it was so funny that he agreed to run the race. Thus it was arranged that the fox would lay out the course and be the judge. The race started. While the tortoise plodded slowly along, the hare got so far ahead that he thought it foolish to run any more. He lay down to rest and soon fell fast asleep. When he woke up, he remembered the race and ran as fast as he could. When, panting and tired, he reached the goal, he found that the tortoise had already crossed the finish line and won the race. On the edge of a small clearing near a great forest, there lived a poor woodcutter and his wife and his 2 children, Hansel and Gretel. The wife was the children's stepmother, and she was very cruel to them. They had always been very poor, but one time there was a great famine in the country, and the woodcutter could not earn even enough to buy any food for his family. The poor woodcutter worried day and night. Finally, he said to his wife, "What shall we do? We will surely starve. The food we have left is not enough for the children, let alone for us." "I have a plan," the stepmother said. "Early in the morning, we will take the children into the forest and leave them in the thickest part of it. They will never find their way home again, and we will be rid of them." "I cannot do that," cried the woodcutter. But the cruel woman forced him to agree. Now Hansel and Gretel heard them talking, and Hansel thought of a clever plan. Creeping outside, he filled his pockets with pebbles. The next morning, before the sun was up, the stepmother shouted to the children, "Get up, you lazy bones! We're going into the forest to cut wood. Here is a piece of bread. Don't eat it yet, because you won't get any more." Then they set off for the forest, with Hansel and Gretel lagging in the rear. Gretel carried their bread, and Hansel stopped every few steps to drop a pebble on the ground. Finally, the father called back, "Hansel, hurry up! What's keeping you?" "Oh, I'm just looking at my white kitten who's sitting on the roof," said Hansel. "She's trying to say goodbye to me." "You fool!" cried the stepmother. "That's the sunlight glinting on the roof." When they reached the middle of the forest, the father built a good fire. Then the stepmother said, "Wait by the fire while we go to chop wood. We'll be back soon to get you." Hansel and Gretel fell asleep. When they woke up, it was night. Hansel comforted Gretel, who was frightened by the dark. Then, when the moon came up, they could see the pebbles that Hansel had dropped, and they followed them all the way home. When they got home, the cruel stepmother planned again to get rid of them, and the next day they all went once more to the forest. This time Hansel was not able to collect pebbles, so he dropped breadcrumbs instead. But when evening came, they couldn't find the breadcrumbs. The birds had eaten them. All night they walked, and all the next morning. Suddenly, they saw before them a little house all made of gingerbread, with windows of spun sugar. They ran towards it eagerly. Hansel ate a piece of the roof, and Gretel ate some of the window. Then they heard a voice saying, "Nibble, nibble like a mouse. Who is nibbling at my house?" The children answered, "It's only the wind." And they went on eating. Then the door of the house opened, and an old woman came out leaning on a crutch. The 2 children were very frightened, but the ugly old woman spoke very sweetly. "Do come in," she said. "You must be very hungry and tired, for you look as if you've come a long way." Then she led them into the house. There she invited them to sit down to dinner. They were so hungry that they ate everything on the table. When they'd finished, the old woman put them to bed in great, comfortable beds. Now, although the old woman seemed so kind, she was really a wicked witch who ate little children. So while Hansel and Gretel were sleeping, she was thinking of the fine meal she would have. The next morning, she awakened Hansel and put him into a cage. No matter how he begged her to get out, her heart didn't soften. Then she woke up Gretel and put her to work. "I'm going to eat you both," she said. "But first you can do some of my work." So poor Gretel had to carry water, chop kindling, scrub floors, and sweep the rooms. Gretel did not get very much to eat, but the best kind of food was given to Hansel, for the witch thought he was too thin. Each morning she asked him to stretch out his finger so she could feel how fat he was, for she could not see well. But Hansel stuck out an old bone, so she thought he was not growing any fatter. At last the witch decided to eat him anyway. Gretel had to build a fire and fill the kettle, and she cried as she worked. Then the witch came to Gretel and said, "Crawl into the oven, Gretel, and see if it is hot enough." But Gretel replied, "I don't know how to do it. How do I climb into the oven?" "Oh, stupid!" cried the witch. "The door is big enough. Why, I could get in myself." She bent down and put her head in the oven. Quick as a flash, Gretel pushed her in and slammed the door. Then Gretel let Hansel out of his cage. "Hansel, we're free," she cried. "The old witch is dead." Filling their pockets with glittering jewels from the witch's hoard, they set off through the woods, determined to find their way home. But though Hansel and Gretel walked and walked, they were still lost, and not a thing looked familiar. Just when they'd given up hope, they heard a happy cry, and there was their father coming towards them. "Oh, Hansel, Gretel," cried the father, hurrying to them. "I've looked and looked for you." He took them home, and Hansel and Gretel found that their cruel stepmother had gone away forever, and with the jewels that they had brought from the witch's house, they were able to live comfortably and happily ever after.